Buddy, it's Pratik, and welcome to Life on Hard Mode number 2. So, this week's episode we'll be talking about how to get into big tech and some housekeeping before we proceed. Thank you all for joining last week. It was my first time recording an episode like that, and I really appreciate the viewership, everybody who watched, everybody who gave feedback and comments. I really appreciate you. So, this week's episode was something that a lot of people asked me about. And true to the spirit of being authentic, no BS, we're going to talk about what it really means into getting into big tech. And this is like no, there are like no sellable guides, whatever in this. It's all about like what are the true resources you need to take. Even in this changing landscape, how do you make sure that you are relying on the fundamentals and being able to fit into patterns, rubrics that already exist in big tech companies or large companies or even like any legacy enterprise in the world. So that being said, welcome and let's get started. So this is episode 2. Come aboard all over again. Here's the agenda for today. I'm going to answer some more questions, and main topic of the week is how to get a job in big tech in today's market. And finally, we'll end with some news and research talks and take it from there. So if you're new here, hi, I'm Pratik Karki, co-founder of Anthramind. Anthramind is one of the leading post-training data companies in the world, founded it last year in San Francisco. And I'm very happy that you all are here. So the plan for today, we're going to start off with Friday Positivity, which we start off with every week. The topic of the week, which is where the main brunt of the podcast is going to go into, is how to get into big tech. We'll look at a few questions that people have asked and answer them. And finally, we will end in my favorite segment, which is PS. What have I been reading / watching / playing? Thank you. And let's get forward. So Friday Positivity for this week is showing up is half the work. What does that mean? So if you take a look at this graphic, audio listeners, you probably cannot see this graphic over here, but it's essentially a chart that shows two sort of models, right, of 7 days a week. And showing up daily, what we think it means, you might think it means that you need to have your glass full every single day of the week, but in reality, you have differences in like energy levels or outcomes or impacts. Like Monday, you might go in with like full energy and have amazing outcomes. Tuesday, you might hit a slump. Wednesday, you might be like halfway there, Thursday, Friday, low. And on Saturday, you have like another massive boost. So it's unpredictable. But what really matters is that you're consistent, because nobody can show up and be 100% every single day. So if you do that, you're being too hard on yourself. So I'd recommend folks to, take a step back and not be so hard on themselves. So not every day will be the best day ever, but showing up still helps. Don't miss opportunities because you didn't show up. So, I think there's like a few examples, especially with like customers or something of that sort, where I've been showing up every day, emailing folks, talking to people on LinkedIn, on X, like really putting myself out there. And, a lot of days it doesn't work. But what really helped was like I was showing up daily, and some crazy connections were made on days that you never thought you'd make a connection like that. And that's led to sales, that led to like, interview offers, a lot of different things. And it all was a result of showing up every day. And I really like this poem that's written over here. This was in front of my middle school, right? There's like when we got to school, in front of the gate was this poem written by St. Augustine. It's a very old poem and it's called The Ladder. And this segment of it is amazing. So to requote St. Augustine, the heights by great men reached and kept were not attained by sudden flight. But they, while their companions slept, were toiling upwards in the night. Amazing lesson. I really hung on to this poem ever since I was a kid, right? Because the idea of being able to toil endlessly and climb to these amazing heights is possible because you put in the work every day. And even if others are sleeping, you are like quietly working, chipping away at it, and that leads you to amazing heights. I actually took this as an allegory for people that climbed Mount Everest or Annapurna. In my head, I was like, oh wow, these people that climbed these mountains must have kept on climbing while the rest of the companions slept, because I took the meaning of height literally when I was a kid. But it goes to show that you can climb to crazy heights if you just show up regardless of how other people are doing. All right, so topic of the week. This is what a lot of people have been asking me, like over the years, especially recently, is like, Pratik, how do I get a job? Or like, Pratik, will you review my resume, and how can you help me get into XYZ's job, right? Just recently somebody was messaging me on LinkedIn being like, hey, there's a new job opening at Google. Like, how can you help me? Or, hey, can you review my resume for this particular role? So I'd really like to talk about it because it's something that's been requested by a lot of people, something I personally have a lot of experience with. I did not get a job at Google just, out of the bat. It took me 4 or 5 years of trying. I tried for multiple internships, got multiple rounds of interviews, went to a few final rounds and, failed them all. And finally in 2020, it worked out and I started my job the next year. And if you look at my job application cycle for 2020, this is what it looked like. I was in my master's program, applied to nearly 200 places, and I got one offer. Now, this is actually a very condensed timeline because I started applying in July and got an offer by, I think, end of November, December. So realistically, if it had gone on until the next year, it would have probably taken me, at least 10 times the number of applications to finally land a job. So it is a struggle. I totally understand where it's from, and I have a lot of examples of me failing jobs, right? I did final round interviews at Meta, Databricks, even NVIDIA, and didn't get any of them. And so many failed internship job opportunities. And so I come at it from a place of compassion and a lot of understanding from both being like an interviewee and an interviewer, what it takes to, finally get the job offer. So moving on, I'd like to talk a little bit about my background before Google and what that meant, right? Just to lay the foundation. So I'm not like some tech genius. I didn't grow up, coding when I was 3 years old, or come from a family with any background in this, right? I'm not like a Bay Area kid, so it's like uphill struggle. And I did not have much exposure to tech in Nepal. Like I think most of Nepal, the internet came pretty late. I don't think we even had internet in the house until like 2010 or something like that. I love tinkering on the computer, there's a lot of like old games I like playing, so I was able to like hack into them certain ways, by using like Genie code and all of these things. That is my experience, but nothing too crazy, right? It is all limited. It is all based on like what is available in the existing systems. I read a lot of books, but I had no exposure to tech. The first time I heard about Google was probably like in sometime in the 2000s, or like even maybe 2010, who knows, right? And my brother was like, oh, do you know this company called Google? You can go to work just wearing your pajamas because there's no dress code. And it was like fascinating to me. I was like, wow, that is pretty crazy. I had no idea you could just do that. And that was the first time I ever heard about it. I was very interested in like math and systems. So mathematics, or maths, sorry, that's what they call it in British English. So, in school, I was really good in math. Really loved it. Math and science were my jam. I really like systems in general, right? It was like very fascinating to me. Like, how does the Roman Empire work? Or, how does, what is an operating system, right? It was questions that I had very early on. There's no way to study CS when I was in school. I don't think my school offered computer science until after I had graduated. But I started computer science in my first semester in college and fell in love with it immediately. It was amazing, right? I was using Lisp-based language called Scheme to create, and this is like purely functional programming language, to create some amazing visuals using this tool called GIMP. and there's so much you could do with it, and it is very fascinating because learning about like recursive models, all of these things, it was like insanely interesting, like memoization, dynamic programming, all of the efficiencies with it, and eventually like algorithms and data structures. I really loved all of them. I immediately had the need to prove that I could compete at the highest level. It did not matter that I was not like some tech whiz at like 3 years old, like a lot of stories that you hear. But what it mattered was like, hey, I like it. I want to get into it. And I was like, you know what? I see myself working at Google. I see myself being the best of the best. So I applied multiple times there. Failed shit ton of interviews, and failed final interviews at companies like Nvidia and Meta as well. And it really, it hurts, right? Getting rejections, but it really helped me fine tune the way I'm doing things. And it's also built up a lot of, like, I have a very thick skin, right? I don't care about rejections anymore because I'm so used to them, right? No is the default, is the mindset that you should have. Yes is actually like an exception. And that's for most things in life. So the startup has, I would not say it's been easy, but it's something that I'm used to. I'm not like some prodigy that always heard yes, 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 yes. It was more like, persistence and hard work. That's what really paid off. All right, so what do companies like Google look for? So there are 4 key things, and this is sort of reflected on the hiring rubric as well. The number 1 is strong fundamentals. This is obviously something you need to have. You need to be able to know your data structures and algorithms. If you're doing a PM interview, you need to know all of the frameworks. I'm not like an expert in like product management, but if you read the Cracking the Product Management book, there's probably a lot of information there. So very strong fundamentals. You need to know it inside and out, which, if you go to college, if you're good at it, you're going to know. You're going to have to practice. So that's by default, right? This is like something that they expect by default. And everything on top of that is what really makes you exceptional. So the second thing is the ability to break down problems. So there's a lot to go with this, right? Just being able to like know something of lead code, or you find like a YouTube video talking about like how to do like reinforcement learning with verifiable rewards. Just being able to regurgitate that is not enough. Being able to think through it, like you really understand it and you can break it into components, that is what really puts you ahead. So if you're doing a coding problem, being able to break it down into what are the constraints, what are possible solutions, what are the test cases, all of them come together to build this cohesive problem. And it becomes even more important when you're thinking in terms of systems, like where does a load balancer go, why do I need like a memcache or some sort of like caching store, right? And all of that comes together to really bolster your claim, right? The third is clear communication. I really see this in a way of like being able to articulate what you're saying precisely, and neither be too short nor be too long. And that requires a lot of practice. In my tips, I'm going to talk about like how to build the skill up. But I can say for a fact that doing as many mock interviews as possible really increases your communications skill. And you can, code and talk at the same time, or you can talk through it like you. And I guess like the easy way to think about it is if you can explain it to a 5-year-old, you're golden. And there are varying levels of it, but know your audience and be able to communicate in a way that your message goes through. That's the third thing. And the final thing, and this is the X factor, it's called Googliness in Google, but a lot of companies have similar things, which is culture fit. It does not matter if you're the best programmer in the world if you're like a rotten fit for the culture. Like that is just a fact. And what does that mean? That means that if the company is like Uber and they have like a crazy engineering culture where you need to be on top of stuff, you're sharing resources all the time, and you're building day in and day out, a person who is from like a legacy systems enterprise, like something in like insurance or something, will not be able to survive there, and they'll bring the team down. So being able to bucket people into these things is very difficult. And that's something that is, hard for somebody to develop, but you can sort of think of ways from your experiences or from your own personality that would fit into this. Googliness is not defined, but there are certain things, right? Like if you're applying for a software engineering job in YouTube, you can ask around, you can understand from Reddit or Glassdoor what sort of folks work in there, how's the interview process like, or what is the day-to-day culture like. Ask those questions, and they really help, right? And one thing I haven't mentioned here that's not in this list is asking great questions. So just because you're being interviewed does not mean you should not ask questions. In fact, if you do not ask questions, it's a very big red flag. If you ask really compelling questions that are thoughtful, you put a lot of time thinking about it, and really, really matches what they want, it's a great way of showing enthusiasm for the product. So the next thing that I want to talk about is everything I did to prepare. And this is very useful because I did all of this when I was preparing for interviews. And in fact, since I'm recruiting right now and I've interviewed and made suggestions to hire lots of people at Google, I've seen it from the other side, and I think this is like a great middle ground where all of the great advice comes together, and this is pretty much all you need. So let's speak about the technical prep that you need to prepare first. Number one, foundation stuff. In my case, algorithms and data structures. And this is, you don't need to say too much about this. You need to know your, algos and DS. Otherwise, it's going to be your DSA. It's going to be very hard for you to get anywhere forward if you don't even know the foundations, right? So know them really well, read Cracking the Coding Interview, all of that. Coding while speaking. This is something that you need to build your skill on. If you're somebody who can code a solution really well, but you're not able to speak while doing it, it makes it really hard for the interviewer to know what you're doing. Systems thinking. So this is more in this macroeconomics or macro scale of things, right? Which is you do not want to just know how to do one specific task very well. You need to be able to ask a lot of questions. You need to ask why this thing in this stack, why is this useful in terms of business, right? You want a load balancer there, or you want to use a Kubernetes cluster. Why? Why do you need a microservice architecture versus a monolith? And these are all things that you learn about and should be able to articulate by taking the entirety of the system into account, or even the business function. Because at the end of the day, when you're interviewing for a job, it's a part of a business hire, right? So if you cannot understand what the business implications of you coding XYZ solution is, then it's going to be very hard to get hired. Some great resources. You have Cracking the Coding Interview, which is a great book for foundational stuff. It might be a little outdated now, but the learnings from that, which is how to articulate really well, and the foundational stuff from that is really good. There's Deep Learning AI. Andrew Nguyen from that is really good. He's one of the OGs, right? And there are plenty of resources in X or newsletters that you can find. People post tips all the time, and there are great communities where people are just teaching each other all the time. I recommend looking into that. Be proactive, don't be reactive. The second thing is personal projects. This is even more important than it used to be in the past. I would not say it used to be easier, crazy easy, but you know how bad the job market is right now. So you got to build projects in the space. You got to document everything. You got to write down all of the metrics and lessons. This is super important, right? If you can start a blog, start a blog. If you can write it in your GitHub repo, write it there. If you can speak about it in camera like I'm doing, amazing, because that really helps you articulate what you learned really well. And you build a project quietly and never talk about it, or have never written down any lessons from it. It becomes much harder to actually quantify it, talk about it, make sure it's widely visible. Let's say you write an app and 100,000 people use it. I mean, it's cool, right? But what if you did all of that and then you made a YouTube video talking about it and did all of the lessons? It's an amazing shareable asset. So think of it that way. The other thing is, if you're doing a personal project, like you're building like your own personal agent, you're launching a small startup, whatever, right? You're building like an agentic workflow. Try to do an end-to-end but complete solution. So do not try to be like, oh, I'm launching this startup and it's like half-assed, right? And it's half complete. Don't just put something on Mixpanel or Streamlit and nothing is working, or like it does half of the things, right? Focus on one specific thing. It can be simple as like an API, or like a CRUD thing that works really well, or like a tool call for an agent that is extremely well built. That goes much further. I mean, if you can build like a massive large project that is end to end, then it's amazing, but not everybody has that time, and you can quickly build end to end small solutions for the particular company you're applying for. So let's say you're applying for Databricks as a solutions architect. You can build something on like Spark, in a few hours or a few days at most. And if you can build it complete end to end, that is really amazing. And lastly, for personal projects, build, and this is part of the resources that I'll share, which is a rubric or a worksheet for personal stories and projects. And from these personal stories and projects, let's say you don't have a lot of like practical experience, right? You haven't done any internships or had any jobs. You just had like your own personal projects. But you can build your own personal stories, right? Which is like, they might be like, oh, tell me about a time in which you had like a really hard deadline to meet. And then you can do things like talk about your personal project and how you're trying to meet deadlines there because of funding or whatever, right? And it really helps. And this goes in with like learning the metrics and lessons. But if you can bracket it into these behavioral questions, you already have a lot of ammunition in your packet to go off of. The third column that I'd like to talk about is interview prep. So I mentioned this before. The number one thing you can and should do is do as many mock interviews as possible. When I was interviewing at the end of college, I was in this platform called Prampt.com, Prampt, Prampt.com. I think it is like prepare as much as possible. I forgot what the acronym is. But what that platform did is like it matches you with a random person, and you guys can take turns interviewing each other. So 30 minutes you interview the other person, 30 minutes they interview you. And it got to a point where I was doing one of these things a day, or like twice a day if I had like an interview coming up. So I'd spend, on top of college, on top of like, personal projects, on top of work study for 20 hours a week and homework and all of that, I was doing 1 to 2 hours of Prampt mock interviews a week. Or not, sorry, a day actually. And it is pretty crazy, right? I can send you my calendar from then and you'd be shocked at like how much time I had to sink into this, but it really helps. And get as many repetitions as you can. The next thing you can do is ask on Reddit, Glassdoor, any place you can think about for advice. See what other people did. It is not universal. It's not like, oh, you'll get like all of the answers to you handed on the spot. But it's more like there'll be a lot of folks that are willing to guide you or answer some questions or tell you about the culture fit or what the interview process is like. Learn about the interviewer. If you get to know the name of the interviewer, stalk them on LinkedIn, whatever. I've had like folks who I had as interviewees ask me directly, like, hey, seems like you're interviewing me in a couple of days. What can you tell me about XYZ? And obviously I couldn't tell them much, but I'd just be like, all right, here's this like site you should check out or something like that. And people are willing to help that, and you can look at the interviewer, you can see what they're working on, see if they have like a recent blog post, and you can really find something niche in there that you can use. For the next thing is follow interview frameworks like ideate, constraints, solution, coding, and test cases. This is a very classic one for coding problems or even like building up agentic use cases. So first of all, if you're coding something or building like a custom agent, think about it instead of just jumping into coding. Think of the first step where you actually think of the ideas that pop into your head and really be able to communicate that. Then look at the constraints. Maybe the constraint is it must be done in like O of n time. Then that is something you need to clarify beforehand. Or if an agent needs like X amount like benchmarks, or like latency can be like only as much as X amount, that's a great thing to look at. Think of a few solutions, propose them, start coding while communicating, and finally, if you have time, do test cases. So if you follow frameworks like this, it really standardizes the work you do. So you're not like one interview use case, you do something totally different, the other one you do something else. Frameworks really help you like digest a problem, and once you repeat, it becomes much easier to follow the framework over and over again. And finally, this is something that I've hashed upon a lot. Practice ad nauseum. Practice until you're nauseous. Practice, practice, practice. You know, Malcolm Gladwell said it takes like 1,000 hours of work to be great at something. So, or 10,000 hours of work, sorry. So think of how much practice you need to do. And whatever you're doing, it's probably not enough, if I'm going to be very honest. And, you know, I don't like being mean like that or whatever, but it is something that, you know, you should really think about. So what would I do today? Things have changed a lot, right? It's not as easy as it was in 2021 to get a job in 2025. Things have changed a lot of layoffs, hiring freezes. So on top of this being persistent, you know, and everything, think about focusing on the fundamentals. This is, you know, nobody can take that away from you. If you're fundamentally very sound and you can show a lot of enthusiasm, then nobody can take that away from you. Show extreme curiosity. If you're curious, then, you know, that goes a very long way. People would rather hire somebody who is, you know, a little rusty, but extremely curious because they really believe in the tech. You got to build, and build. Build personal projects. Now's the best time ever, right? Build something on Cursor, you know, no matter what it is. You want to build something cool, you want to build your own thing, you want to build something for that industry, for that specific use case, build it. Similarly, do an end-to-end project. You know, you might build stuff and, you know, it's cool or whatever to flex your muscles, but you want to really spend some time building things that are end-to-end, very refined, you know, you have like a specific source and a sink. The other thing is you could launch your own startup. I mean, now's the best time ever. You know, get the Cursor subscription, you know, launch your own startup. If it's an AI, talk to me. And if it's something where you need post-training data, also talk to me. Happy to help you out over there. The other thing you could do is self-publish a research paper, or better yet, if you are in college or you're in your PhD or postdoc, whatever, publish more. I mean, it's easier said than done, but, you know, especially for CS, there's a lot of publishing you can do very quickly. But if you want to self-publish, platforms like Archive are very recipient to that, and you can get published there very quickly and get citations there as well. Network like crazy. Like, I cannot stress this enough. I know somebody from Grinnell, won't mention his name, but, you know, if you're watching, hello, who probably like interviewed or like, you know, just cold reached out to like hundreds of people in like the Bay Area and all across America because they really wanted to, you know, understand the industry and launch something. And that sort of like level of spunk and enthusiasm is really like commendable, and people really look for that, right? So don't be scared of networking. Cold message people on LinkedIn being like, hey, I know XYZ, or like, I'm interested in XYZ. But don't be like, oh, you got time for a call or something like that without saying anything. Ask something specific. Start in like small bites. You can be like, hey, you want to review my resume, or like, hey, I just launched this startup, or hey, I just wrote this blog post. Do you want to review it? So start with something bite-sized, because it's hard. And I get a lot of requests like that, which is like, hey, I'm so-and-so, I'm super interested in like AI. Do you have like time for a 30-minute call? And I'm like, if I did that, then I'd have no time to do work. But if you send me something small to show your promise, like, you know, it can even be a paragraph of work you did, then I'm more recipient to that. You do not want to start off just being like, hey, spend 30 minutes of your life with me. That's a hard ask to ask anybody, especially busy people. So be smart about networking. connect to the right people, send cold emails, but do not ask for too much, right? The lift must not be too crazy. You share the resources. They make the decision whether they want to speak to you or not. And finally, this is super important. Do not assume things will come to you easily. What that means is like, keep your expectations low. Expect that you'll have to work like crazy to get in anywhere, like get that job that you want or whatever. And do not assume things will come easy. And there's one last thing. It's not on the slides, but I just remembered it. One of my good friends gave me this advice when I was applying for jobs, which is like, you only need one. So, it can be, you could apply to thousands of places, but all you need is that one offer. And that one is only one that matters. I mean, it's ideal to get like multiple offers and, compete against each other, but not everybody has that luxury. If you're in that position, good for you. Try to get a bigger compensation package if you can from that. But just aim for that one job. That one win is all you need. All right, so that's it on the topic of the week. Happy to answer more questions. I have like an anonymous feedback form and all of that. And actually, let me show that to you guys before moving on to the next question. So people that are like, and okay, there you go, you can see it. So I'm sharing my screen. So people that are audio only, I'm sharing my screen, and what I'm sharing is a Google Drive that is included in the Substack, and it's got like a bunch of resources there. First of all, I have a hiring checklist. This is like the full hiring funnel, what you need to do before you even apply to a job, all the way to what you do after getting a job offer, like how to negotiate, all of that. So it's a great checklist. Get that, it's all in my Substack. I've also uploaded a hiring rubric used by companies like Google or any big tech companies. And they have specific things like role-related knowledge, culture fit, leadership, general cognitive ability, and how it's scaled and ranked and all of that. So definitely take a look at this one. I also have a resume teardown, what a good resume looks like and what a bad resume looks like. And feel free to take a look at that. And finally, this one is like super important. It's a universal story rubric. And what that means is it's a worksheet, a Google Doc file in which there are like a bunch of different topics like problem solving, like collaboration or leadership without authority. And it's a worksheet because you can put examples from your own career over there. And that really helps you when you have like a curveball question, like a behavioral question, and you can answer that really well. All right, so I would like to move on to questions and answers that folks have asked me. I have a couple, and these are some really good ones. So stay tuned for that. So the first one is, why do you post on LinkedIn so much? This is somebody who messaged me on Facebook this, and it's kind of in jest, but it's also pretty fun, right, to answer this question, because people ask that, right? Like, what is the point of this, right? What is the point of like getting a lot of followers on LinkedIn or whatever? And I'll tell you, it's not the same as like, being on some place like Facebook or Instagram where it's literally done for a clout. Having a good LinkedIn presence is equivalent to having a lot of predictable revenue down the road. It is like a really true thing, right? So let me break this down into two segments. One is you really need to have good LinkedIn presence because it builds your own personal brand, right? You are very well known across the industry. People know you, and that really helps with getting a job or recommendations, and eventually it becomes a really good revenue stream as well. If you are a leader with authority in a particular domain and you're able to build resources, then people are more likely to trust you, and they're more likely to go to your website, sign up, and do a demo call. That's how we got a lot of like inbound calls, which is people who see my LinkedIn posts, they go to my website and they tell me what the use case is, and we do a quick demo and talk to them, and that's how I've signed a lot of deals. So it is a funnel when you think about it, right? You post a lot on LinkedIn. Obviously you want to share what you're doing, do some personal stuff, share announcements, research, blog posts, all of that. But what that really does is that it helps cultivate this thing. People are aware of you, people are aware of your product, and that leads them to take action down the line. So that is why it's not just to be uber famous, which is cool, but that is not the whole goal behind it. The best resources to learn AI. Deeplearning.ai by Andrew Nguyen. Great one. He's a goat. There's also a bunch of other resources. Darkish podcast is really good. I've cited him a bunch of times before. Alphaarchive.com, which is like archive, but where people, it's like Reddit, but for archive. You can comment and discuss research papers together. That's a great one. I believe Stanford, Harvard, they all have like all of their machine learning courses all on YouTube now. All you need to do is, pick up a pen and paper and start watching those YouTube videos and learning from them. And there's like unlimited amount of great resources: Twitter, Reddit, LinkedIn. So the world is your oyster. Ask ChatGPT to compile a list and get started learning. And that's how I do it in today's age. All right, this one is a shameless plug. A lot of people have asked me, can you review my resume? And I've literally been asked by hundreds of people at this point, right? And for this, I have an anonymous feedback form. And in that, feel free to fill out that form. It's totally anonymous. And, put a link to your resume. I do not have an option to upload resume there because, I kind of do not want to pay for too much storage just to house people's resumes. So put it on Google Drive or Notion or whatever and get a shareable link and share it with me. I will get back to you sooner or later. But, for me, I would love to help you guys out. But if I get like 100 resume requests, then, that's like a lot of hours out of my life. So keep it simple. Ask for advice. I'll get back to you sooner or later. But the link should be on my Substack. So please feel free to use that. Feel free to use that to give me anonymous advice, feedback, questions, concerns, everything. All right, we're getting to my favorite part of the show, which is what have I been reading, watching / playing. So this week I'm only going to talk about like what I've been reading, specifically what research papers I've been reading. And there are like some great ones over here. The first one is something called Miro Thinker. So it is very interesting. So these folks, they from MiroMind created this open source research agent, and what it does is like it augments capabilities of models themselves without expanding the model size or increasing the context length to absurd degrees, which is both computationally expensive and also has been shown not to give the results that you want. And if you look at the benchmarks, the performance is really good. It is a really good paper. I think folks should read it as well. The second one, which I really liked as well, is sort of proof is in the pudding, right? That generalist foundation models are not clinical enough for hospital operations. We do a lot of work with clinical companies and healthcare labs and medical large establishments all across the country and the world. And post-training data has been so important there. Like first thing, generalist models are absolutely terrible at doing nuanced things like looking at clinical records or giving recommendations, and it's been a well-known fact. That's why our post-training data has been so important for them. And on top of that, even pre-trained models that are specific for hospital stuff, obviously they are great compared to foundation models, but there's still so much need for great post-training data over there. And we've been able to help successfully reduce hallucination rates and get to that level of trust and accuracy that clinicians need in their practice through AnswerMind, because we have clinicians that review data sets. We create the best synthetic data sets in the world for clinical use cases, and that's what's been able to push that boundary further. Otherwise, you'll have hospitals never trusting pre-trained models ever again. And the last one, and this is somebody I really admire, Dwarkesh Patel. He's had like some amazing guests in his show recently. Richard Sutton, Andre Karpathy, and I think he has like a few other folks coming into his show. And this is a really interesting breakdown into like RL and R reinforcement learning with verifiable rewards, in which there is a lot of information inefficiency. The main gist of it is that the first few sort of pixels or tokens that you are able to feed into a model through reinforcement learning are super valuable, but there's so much diminishing returns. So just expanding the scale is not enough. So the paper talks a lot about what it means to actually build like great models with just limited but great quality of foundational tokens. And it's a really good Substack article. You should read it. And I would love to. I think I can spend a whole episode talking about it, but there's a lot to discuss over there. All right, that brings us to the end of this podcast. Thank you all for tuning in and listening or watching wherever you are. If you have not subscribed already, please remember to subscribe at pratikkarki.substack.com and share with your friends, because it really helps me grow and reach the right audience that I want to. You can comment questions on LinkedIn or X, and you can message me directly on LinkedIn, X, or Substack whenever you want. Thank you so much, and hope you have a great week. We'll chat again next Friday.